I'm Dr. Jen Walker, your resident animal welfare champion.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kate Barger, a globe-trotting poultry vet who's passionate about welfare.
And hi, I'm Allison Pullen, an assistant professor and researcher for animal welfare at North Carolina State University.
And we are not pecking around. We are here for real talk on animal welfare and the science shaping the poultry industry and the barnyard in general. So, folks, let's set the stage. Why the heck are we here, and why did we bring you all together for this conversation? Um, Confession, I am not a chicken expert. I have lots of questions, which is why I kind of pulled you all together. There was a recent article, or maybe a while ago, in Modern Poultry. I think we'll put the link somewhere in show notes. Do we have show notes? I feel like it's cool if we have show notes. I hope we do. But the takeaway was that there's multiple factors that contribute to variable animal welfare outcomes in outdoor access sort of broiler production. And to be honest, I just thought that outdoor access was like the bee's knees of everything for welfare. And from that article, it learned that it turns out that welfare is complicated. And I don't know anything about birds. I know a lot about dairy cattle. So I wanted to get folks together and talk about chicken welfare. So first things first, let's explain to folks new to the barnyard, or maybe folks in the barnyard with muddy boots, what is animal welfare? Because I feel like they're out there and they talk about animal welfare in a few different ways. You hear animal science, I hear animal welfare, and there's animal behavior. So Allison, tell me what your take on animal welfare.
Yeah, so I really like the definition from the World Organization of Animal Health that defines animal welfare as the physical and mental states of an animal in relation to the conditions in which it lives and dies. So, right off the bat, we're seeing that animal welfare is more than one thing, physical and mental states, and it really encompasses that whole lifespan, including death. I would say there's a few different frameworks that we can use to actually then go in and try to define, what are those physical and mental states? How do we assess them? What do we look at for them? The really original framework, and probably one that most people are familiar with, is the five freedoms. So that was a framework established back in the 1960s that established five freedoms that really any animal that's in captivity of any species should be able to have and be in a good state of welfare as a result. We've seen those five freedoms morph into the five domains more recently, which gives us four physical domains and one mental domain that we can think about areas to assess for the animal and their environment and in their health and in their behavior. And then there's also the Fraser's three schools of thought, which is one that I like to use in my program that talks about behavior, biological health and functioning, as well as the affective state or mental state of an animal. So there's multiple ways that we can really look at it, but I think, the core is that we have physical and mental states, and we need to use a variety of metrics through health, behavior, and even cognition to be able to understand an animal's welfare state.
Right, that's very helpful. I think I'm probably most familiar with those three schools of thought. I think that's old school, probably. That reflects my age. So tell me more then within that domains, the pun intended there, is like, what's your line of work? So it sounds like it's a pretty big domain, and there's lots of opportunities to study and things. So what exactly are sort of your focus and your background in that?
Yeah, so I have a PhD in animal behavior from University of California, Davis. And I worked there with the UC Davis's Center for Animal Welfare, really specializing in behavior. So I focus on that behavior domain, which appears in the five domains. It also appears in the five freedoms as the freedom to express normal or natural behavior. And it's also one of those three schools of thought. So we see behavior pop up in every single one of those frameworks. And so in my research program at NC State, we're really looking for opportunities that we can promote what I call a species-specific behavior. So what are the, highly motivated behaviors of poultry? We see that those highly motivated behaviors, if they're given opportunities to express them, can often benefit their physical health and also their mental state. I also look at ways to mitigate abnormal behaviors that we see in poultry. So, for example, turkeys do this thing called injurious pecking. So They peck their flock mates to the point that they'll actually can remove feathers and create skin tears and injuries, which could actually lead to culling and mortality of the birds. So we also look at, what are the underlying motivations of that behavior? What are intervention strategies that we can take to reduce that behavior so that then we can improve the overall health of the birds?
Awesome. That is a lot of good work. I already have so many questions, but okay, I will stay on track. Dr. Kate, you come to this from a little different domain. As a veterinarian, you've worked within the poultry industry for years, over 2 decades, I think. Tell us a little bit about the role of veterinarians in the supply chain, why that matters to the companies, and why that matters to the birds that you're responsible for.
Yeah, so Dr. Walker, when most people think about veterinarians, they don't think about veterinarians that dedicate themselves to the dairy industry like you have over your years in your veterinary career, or like I do working with poultry specifically. So it's a unique role, but it's one that we take very seriously. And it's really interesting. Many poultry companies around the world have dedicated poultry veterinarians who are part of their staff and part of their production teams or work in their hatcheries or their processing plants. And so we, as poultry veterinarians, are responsible for everything from the animal health programs, including vaccination or leading the welfare programs, also food safety, and even evaluating new innovation that can benefit poultry health and welfare. So that's important for the companies from a sustainability standpoint, but also to help the companies evolve and continue to learn about new technology that they can use to improve the care of the birds or the transport of the birds or even the slaughter of the birds. As Allison mentioned, throughout the life and even in the death of the birds, we're really focused on what we can do to optimize their welfare. So I don't know if you all know that there are veterinarians that work specifically in processing plants that oversee health and from a human health standpoint, from a food safety standpoint, as well as welfare of those birds. And there's some veterinarians that provide welfare guidance to the supply chain. So some of the quick service restaurants and the retailers actually work with poultry veterinarians to help understand what's needed or what the new innovation is. For example, hatcheries and enrichments on farms and those things. So we're involved in a lot of really cool things. In my time, over 2 decades in the poultry industry, I've seen my role evolve from being just a veterinarian, really focused on flock health, to really digging into the research and even conducting welfare trials on farms and in hatcheries. So it's been a great way to support companies and to help companies improve what they're doing and help them make sure that their flocks are healthy, but also achieving their welfare goals and meeting supply chain expectations.
That's a really good point. I think the diversity in the veterinary profession, it kind of reminds me of when I first decided to go kind of work in corporate for dairy industry. My grandmother said, I thought you always wanted to be a vet. I was like, I'm still a vet. I'm just not, it's just, I'm vetting in a different way. And it was really hard for folks to understand. So with that, I think, so not every veterinarian is an animal welfare expert. Not every animal behavior scientist is a welfare scientist. But each of us, I think, with our different backgrounds and experience and passions, have come to focus on animal welfare for our career. So Allison, thinking about animal welfare in academia or research, it feels like we also have different areas of emphasis. Maybe there's folks more interested in understanding sort of behavior in general, and then those focus on maybe figuring out what animals really need or want in order to have good welfare. And then others looking at how do you measure success in doing that. So where does your research, you touched on it already a little bit, but tell me a little bit more about where your research kind of fits into that landscape of animal welfare specifically.
Yeah, so I think by focusing on these opportunities to promote, species-specific behaviors or mitigate abnormal behaviors, my lab is really, trying to quantify when do we see those behaviors arise? What kinds of environmental conditions or even health conditions do we see underlying those behaviors? And I think it really lends itself to a lot of great interdisciplinary and collaborative research. So I've worked with immunologists, veterinarians, nutritionists, even folks at the feed mill, neuroscientists. We can all kind of work together to try to find what are these kind of underlying mechanisms driving these behaviors, and then use that information to help us develop those intervention strategies. And one thing that I didn't mention earlier is that, so I am a tenure track faculty at a land grant university. And so we look at research, teaching, and extension opportunities for animal welfare. And so, on the research side, there's really been a lot of great progress in animal welfare research over the last few decades. We see animal welfare research sections at the Poultry Science Association annual meeting and the International Poultry Scientific Forum at IPPE in Atlanta. We see several international poultry welfare meetings, funding opportunities through federal grant agencies and commodity groups. So there's a lot of great opportunities to have this really interdisciplinary, collaborative research so that we can target these really complex mechanisms that are underlying animal welfare issues.
So there's just a lot going on, a lot of folks at the table, which I think is great to bring everybody together. So then I imagine, Kate, when it comes to your job, it's got to be a full-time job sorting out all the stuff between Allison and all these other people. If I feel like there's just journal articles everywhere, and figuring out how to distill that, and figuring out what may or may not apply on farms in the production system. Again, how do you manage that? I would be overwhelmed. Do you just like read one of Allison's papers and go to some chicken company and say, "Hey, go do this"? Or how do you work within that? You take all that information.
Yeah, that's a great question. You're right. We are bombarded by articles and by scientific publications all the time. Certainly, there are a lot in North America, the U.S. and Canada, as well as from Europe. There's so much research being done, and as Allison said, the evolution and welfare and behavior science has really taken a hold, and so it's really exciting. But I guess I should say, unfortunately, I can't just say to somebody, "Hey, here's a paper, go apply it." It doesn't quite work that way. They usually want the Cliff Notes or the one-page version and say, "Okay, what is it you want me to do? What benefit is it going to have? How do I know that it's going to be successful? And perhaps most importantly, in my world, can we make this at scope from a pen research trial to a million bird complex?" So that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges, that you can't simply copy paste research or pen trial research and say, "Hey, now I'm going to put this on a farm that raises 200,000 birds," when the research was maybe just focused on 200 or 1,000 chickens. So in the real world, we have a lot more complications. We have very rural farms typically, which have more limited labor force than you would have in a research setting where you have maybe a lot of students supporting a researcher like Allison. We may have very limited Wi-Fi signal because we have a metal-clad chicken barn and we're already in a very rural area. And we may have a 500-foot long or 600-foot long barn instead of a pen that's maybe 10 or 20 feet long at most. And so there's a lot to think about with regards to logistics and the implementation of that strategy and that technology to make sure that it can really work in a real world setting where we have a lot of dust, where we may have lower lighting, where we may have rodents and insects to cope with as well, and to think about how that technology is going to last over time. So a lot of companies have set up their own trial farms, so they try to replicate what they would have on their grower farms. But it's usually a smaller setting, maybe 2 or 4 houses total. And that's where they will try that. So that's where I get involved sometimes when they say, "Hey, tell us about this new product. Tell us about this new technology. We would like to test it, but we want to do it in a very controlled setting where we can see how this is going to work with our management programs or with our feed mills or with our hatcheries." and try that out so they feel really confident with those results before they try to roll it out over 1 million broilers or over 70 different farms, and then have a real disaster on their hands if it doesn't work.
I get it. I get it. We have similar issues, maybe to not that necessarily degree, on the dairy side, trying to figure out like what do we do with the science? How do I make the science work in practice? And I think those are excellent ways to be able to collaborate with folks like Allison as well when there's that opportunity and thinking about that. But trying to turn research into practice is always that challenge. Um, so it sounds like it's just not that simple. Like it's with most things, it's complicated. So I feel like we're going to have a lot of things to talk about and fill up plenty of episodes. So I'm really excited. But now that we have this level set, I think on what animal welfare is and isn't, let's start thinking about the next episode because our goal here is to not make these hour-long things. We're looking for like a sweet spot of like a 25, 30-minute podcast so folks can squeeze it in at their lunch break or drive into the store. But I'm not quite done. So I'm gonna still peck at you just a little bit because I need your help to prepare and I need your help to answer some basic questions. And again, I'm a dairy vet. I know dairy cow lingo, but I know it's different from dairy to beef cattle and can even vary by geography, like how we reference things on the dairy. And so for my work with Kinder Ground, with pigs, for example, I have to stop and think and force myself because I just call them pigs. And then my friend will correct me. He's like, they're sows, Jen. And that's a guilt. And those are finishers. I'm like, okay. I try to remember. But I think it's important to understand that it matters. Words matter, and it matters how we're talking about them, and really understanding all of these processes and parts of the system. And so we're here to talk about all things animal welfare. So that means we're going to about chickens, all things animal welfare and poultry. So we're going to talk about chickens, but we're going to have a chance to talk about turkeys and maybe even ducks. I have no idea. I'm excited. But specific to chickens, just to help me get started, you need to help me out because I think folks may be like me, and they see like bird and they think of a bird and they just think of a white hen. And they assume it's for laying eggs, kind of like I did. And then they look at a brown bird and they think, well, that must be for meat. Or maybe they assume every chicken is for both. I don't know. Now is your opportunity to set me straight, because I'm just going to ask the question. So maybe start with Allison. Can you explain to folks listening the difference between a layer and a meat breed? Because apparently
Yeah,
there is one.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, so several decades ago, we started seeing this separation of our layer breeds and our meat breeds so that we could really put emphasis on the genetic selection for those egg or meat traits that we really cared about. And so that's how we really ended up with these two different populations. They're both still technically the same species of chicken, that Gallus domesticus. But when you look at them, I mean, they look totally different. And yeah, they have different lifestyles or lengths of life and management practices. So our laying hens or layer breeds are going to be adult female birds that have been genetically selected for egg production. And so they can be white feathered or brown feathered, and they could lay white or brown eggs. We see individual hens as a result of that genetic selection for egg production. They are very efficient egg layers, so they can lay about 1 egg a day. They come into egg production around 18 to 20 weeks of age. Before that point, they're a sexually immature pullet where they're just growing. But once they reach that 18 to 20 weeks of age, they'll start to come into egg production. And then they're typically kept until they're at least 80 weeks old, but could be kept for longer and in egg production that entire time. And that's where we, tend to hear about cage versus cage-free eggs is going to be with those laying hen birds. And so, since they have such a long life cycle, we can see a producer working with the same flock for at least a year at their farm. Now, our meat birds, which we call broiler chickens, those could be male or female birds that have been genetically selected for meat production. The most common breeds that we see out in commercial production are white feathered. And those birds are very efficient at putting on muscle mass. So those birds can reach a 6.5 pound market weight, which could be when they go to processing. Sometimes the market weight that they go to processing depends on, that integrator and sort of what type of product they're trying to produce. But birds can reach a 6.5 pound market weight in just about 47 days or just shy of 7 weeks. So we see a shorter life cycle there on the broilers compared to the laying hens. But again, yeah, very different purposes in terms of what they're being used for.
Awesome. That makes sense. A new word, pull it. Okay, now I got to write that down. So it sounds like there's been a lot of smart folks focusing on really selecting birds that are good to do specific things. Sort of like for beef cattle versus dairy. So we've kind of diverged those. Tell me more about that, Kate. Like just where's that going on and yeah, tell me more about that kind of selection that's going on.
Yeah, so as Allison mentioned many years ago, due to industry expectations, either to have chickens that would really focus on efficient egg production or more efficient meat production, the breeding companies that we traditionally call the primary breeding companies in the poultry world are the ones that dedicated to produce specific breeds for those needs. So one primary breeding company, for example, may produce the broiler genetic crosses for that meat type chicken, and another one may dedicate and focus its efforts on the breeds that are for egg production. And so they would market those different breeds around the world. And most of the breeding companies now are either based in the US or in Europe. And that's for a couple different reasons. One, traditionally, the markets have been relatively stable from sort of a geopolitical and a health status standpoint, but also we can have really good and consistent airlines and trucking routes to move day-old chicks around the world to the customers. And so we continue to see that nowadays. But it's really interesting. On this call, we are all, have a graduate degree, and it's really interesting when you look at the genetics companies. They employ upwards of 10 to 20 geneticists. They're all PhD geneticists that focus on animal breeding specifically. And so they evaluate those birds at different stages and then look at all the data from the individual family history of each of those birds to really understand what's the lineage of that chicken, but also what's that potential outcome of that chicken. So the company that I used to work for example, they select each bird for more than 50 individual traits, and about half of those 50 traits are specific for health and welfare type traits. So whether that's feathering, feather quality, feather coverage, or cardiovascular and skeletal integrity, those are all things that we know they're really important to allow that bird to live a great life and to be very productive. And so as we think about our human health and the equipment that might be used at a clinic or hospital, we use a lot of that same technology even in animal breeding companies. So, for example, a CT machine or other high-tech devices that can measure the cardiovascular and the skeletal structure are used on individual chickens in a very non-invasive way to help us understand what that bird is like right now at 6 weeks so that we can have a better idea how healthy that bird is going to be, hopefully at 20 plus weeks of age when it comes into production. So it's a really cool and very, very involved and very high-tech process that allows the breeding companies, Allison said, to either dedicate to continuous improvement in egg-type chickens or in meat-type chickens.
That's amazing. So you're not just winging it, but I'm
No.
Yeah, awesome.
We're not just we're not just fluffing about here.
Yeah. So tell me, let's dig a little deeper in. I'm gonna take all the time I can squeeze in from you guys. Tell me more about some special characteristics about kind of the white birds versus brown birds. Like I know for dairy we have kind of Holstein and Jersey for our main dairy breeds, but we also have brown Swiss, which is my favorite. Totally chill, beautiful, sweet, but not the Michael Jordan of milk production. So tell me a little bit more about brown versus white.
Yeah, so
If that's the way I'm supposed to say it. I'll just preface that. Like, I'm not sure what the right words are still.
No, no, no. So we talk about feather color is, and you can also look at the chickens don't have ears like we think about, but they do have an earlobe color, and that is kind of a cool fact that you can look at the earlobe color and help predict that color of the egg. But it's really interesting if we just focus on egg type chickens for a minute. In the US, when you go to the grocery store, most of the eggs that you buy are going to be the white shelled variety, and those are from white layers. Versus if you go to Europe and you look and they are brown shelled eggs, most of those are going to be from brown feathered eggs. But you will find both in supermarkets in both regions of the world. And that's just around consumer expectations. And I've had people over the years say to me, well, if the brown eggs cost more, does that mean that they're healthier? Or does that mean that they're better for you or they're better value? And the answer to that is no. They just come from different types of chickens or different feather colors of chickens. Brown feathered birds tend to be bigger. They eat more feed. They produce a few less eggs than their white feathered sort of sisters, if you will, the other breeds. And so that's why they cost a little bit more. But chickens, if you look at people that raise chickens on a hobby level, you can find all black feathered chickens and even black skinned chickens. You can find black and white chickens, brown and white speckled, golden ones, lots of different colors. But over time, the breeding companies have sort of, for the most part, specialize their breeds into either brown feathered or white feathered. And that's just from an efficiency standpoint and also the breeds that are most productive in meeting the supply chain. So chickens are really cool and have a lot of personality. And just like dairy cows, where you're going to find some differences in behaviors, we also see that with chickens, that some breeds are a little bit calmer and easier to manage than others. So you can't just say that all the chickens are the same, but there are a lot of really neat differences between them once you start sort of peeling back the shell, if you will, and looking a little bit deeper.
Well, that's amazing. I have a new bucket list item to go look at a chicken's earlobe. I had no idea. There is a lot to talk about, and I have so many more questions now. But since this whole thing started with this article from Allison that had written about broiler welfare outcomes, maybe the next time when we get together, we'll talk about broilers and start pecking at that a little bit. Is there anything to talk about there? Like, what do you guys want to talk about next?
Oh gosh, we have so many topics we can talk about. Everything from housing and different enrichments that are now used to encourage those positive behaviors we want to see. A chicken is not just a chicken, but we actually have different things we want to see, different behaviors and layers or broilers. So we can talk about that. And lighting is probably one of the hottest topics. Chickens see very differently than we do as people, and so we're learning more and more about that and how we can encourage good welfare outcomes just by using different types of lighting. And so that's a really exciting topic that I'd love to tell you more about.
Awesome. How about you, Allison?
Yeah, I totally agree with Kate. I think that lighting and environmental enrichment are really cool opportunities to look at how that affects, the bird's behavioral expression, their activity, and how that can also have consequences for their walking ability, their production efficiency. My lab has also been looking into outdoor access and sort of trade-offs with, outdoor and indoor environments. And then we've also seen a lot of research coming out now comparing broiler breeds that differ in growth rate and how that, relates back to behavioral expression, different types of welfare indicators like lameness, foot pad dermatitis, and also their affective state. So I think, yeah, lots of opportunities and exciting research coming out that we can get into.
Great. All right. We're going to be doing podcasts for the next 10 years. We have so much to cover. So that's it for that. Join us for our next episode where we're going to talk about chickens raised for meat. That is broilers. Now that we know that, who may have brown feathers, but probably will have white. And we're going to learn more about housing and the husbandry of broilers and dive into some of the research that folks like Dr. Pullen are doing to promote better welfare, from behavior to lighting, and even how they're walking. But before that, I'm going to sneak in one more question. And I'm kind of embarrassed because I do think it's a stupid question. But white birds, brown birds, you mentioned black, you mentioned all kinds of things. Nobody mentioned yellow. baby chicks are yellow, aren't they? So do the feathers change? Do they shed them? Why are peeps, we'll call them peeps, why are they yellow? I know it's a stupid question, but forgive me.
Jen, you bring up a great point. There are no dumb questions. So whether you are asking us the question or whether somebody sends us their question to nodumbq@kinderground.org, we hope that we can continue to answer these questions moving forward. But chicks are born with fluff, so they are cute and fuzzy. They're not always yellow. Sometimes they can actually have brown stripes and look a little bit different. But then they hit what I call those teenage years, which are really in days for chickens, where they start to lose those and they have their more mature feathers. And that's where they sort of morph from this cute fuzzy chick into this more adult looking chicken, and that's where they get those feathers. But there are lots of cool things we can tell you about chickens' feathers, even starting at day of age when they hatch, and they are cute and fuzzy, but they do lose that baby fluff, and it's something that we'll tell you more about in a future episode.
Awesome. Brilliant. I love that. So send us your questions. That's at nodumbq@kinderground.org, and we will try to answer them in future episodes. If you like what we've been clucking about so far, so give us a like, a heart, a clap, or whatever you do these days on social, and follow us. Until then, stay curious and be kind, and we'll see you next time here at What the Cluck, because we are not pecking around. We're here for real talk on animal welfare and the science shaping the poultry industry and beyond. So until then, see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.